Okay, so are you ready to dive into some serious Indian history and government? Because that's what we're doing today.
I am so ready. Let's do it.
We are tracing India's journey from being under British rule to the vibrant democracy it is today, and we are going deep.
All right, let's get into it.
You know, we always like to bring in the good sources, and today we're pulling from M. Laxmikanth's Indian Polity.
A classic.
It's kind of like if you want to really understand Indian politics and government, this is the book.
This is it.
This is the one.
This is like the insider's guide.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So let's set the stage here.
Okay.
It's the early 1900s. The British Raj is in full swing, but there's this glimmer of change with the Government of India Act of 1919.
Okay.
Now, this act granted limited voting rights, but here's the catch. It was only if you owned property, paid a certain amount of taxes, or educated to a certain level.
Right.
It just feels a little bit like a classic keep the power with the select few kind of move.
Oh, absolutely. A classic colonial power play.
Right.
You know, you hit the nail on the head. By limiting who could vote, they essentially ensured that only those aligned with their interests had a real say in how things were run.
Right. It's like, why rock the boat too much if you can just kind of keep things...
Exactly. Keep a lid on it.
Yeah, keep a lid on it, keep the power consolidated. And this is at a time when the fight for full independence is gaining momentum.
Exactly. There's a lot going on. And it makes you think, how did they pull this off? You know?
Yeah, talk about a powder keg.
Yeah.
So in the midst of all of this, Laxmikanth points out this seemingly small detail, the separation of provincial budgets from the central budget.
Right.
And I'm reading this and I'm like, this can't just be an accounting quirk.
No, you're way ahead of me on that one. This was a huge deal.
Yeah.
This separation, also a product of that 1919 Act, was a big step towards fiscal federalism.
Okay.
And that basically means different levels of government get their own money and power to spend it.
Okay.
So it's like planting the seeds for a decentralized system where states have more control over their own affairs. Yeah. So that one little detail would have this ripple effect for years to come.
Wow. Okay, so fast forward to 1947.
Right.
India throws off the shackles of British rule and bam, the office of the Secretary of State for India is abolished.
Right.
No more puppet master calling the shots from London.
Gone.
It's over.
Yeah. You know, it's amazing how one act can hold so much symbolic weight.
Right.
You know, that was a clean break from the past. And it really signified the dawn of India charting its own course.
And that course led straight to the Constituent Assembly.
Yes.
Now, this wasn't your typical, we're going to have an election and everyone's going to vote. This was, they had this monumental task of drafting a constitution for a brand new nation.
Right. And imagine the pressure to get it right.
Oh, my God.
For a country as diverse and as complex as India.
And with this, history of being under colonial rule, so they're trying to create something new.
And there were so many different voices and perspectives that they had to take into account.
Yeah, and this assembly wasn't, directly elected the way we think of it today.
Right.
They were chosen by these provincial assemblies that themselves were a product of, remember that limited franchise we talked about?
Exactly.
Yeah, so not exactly the most representative group at the start.
Right.
And then to make matters even more complicated, you have the Muslim League, which was a major political party at the time, and they decided to boycott the whole thing.
Yeah, they wanted a separate Muslim state, which we now know as Pakistan.
Right.
So their boycott really cast a long shadow over everything.
Yeah.
It was a stark reminder of the religious and political divides within India and a sign of things to come.
Yeah.
With the partition.
Wow. It's incredible that they were even able to draft a constitution at all, given all of those challenges.
I know. It's really remarkable when you think of it.
But they did.
They did.
And this is where I think it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Laxmikanth mentions very casually that the assembly adopted the preamble, the we the people part, after they finished the rest of the Constitution.
Really?
Yeah. Why on earth would they do that?
That's a great question. It's one of those details that still has scholars scratching their heads.
I mean, really?
Yeah. Some say it was a deliberate move to really emphasize that the Constitution ultimately derived its authority from the people.
Okay.
We the people kind of thing. But others think it might have been a more strategic decision to avoid potential arguments early on.
Right. Get the stuff that everyone's going to agree on.
Exactly. And then worry about the preamble later.
Save that for the end.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So no discussion about the Constitution would be complete without talking about Dr. B.R. Ambedkar.
Of course.
Often called the father of the Indian Constitution.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just picturing him, in the thick of it.
Oh, absolutely. In the thick of all those debates.
All of those debates, all of those arguments.
Yeah.
What made him such a pivotal figure?
He wasn't just a brilliant legal scholar.
Yeah.
He was also a fierce champion for social justice. You know, as the chairman of that drafting committee, he played this really important role in shaping the Constitution's core principles, especially when it came to like equality and the rights of marginalized communities.
Laxmikanth really talks about how, he wasn't just present. He was like very active in all of these debates.
Oh, yeah.
And he was logical and forceful and persuasive.
Absolutely.
Makes you kind of wish that there were recordings of those debates.
Wouldn't that be amazing?
Do you imagine?
Can you imagine the passion, the disagreements,
Yeah.
the intellectual sparring? It must have been incredible.
And it's the gravity of the situation.
I know it.
It gives me chills.
Yeah.
So speaking of those core principles,
Yeah.
let's talk about something that is both really fascinating and also kind of head-scratching.
Okay.
This whole idea of federalism in the Indian context.
Right.
Laxmikanth calls India an indestructible union of destructible states.
Yeah.
How can something be both indestructible and destructible at the same time?
It sounds like a riddle.
It does sound like a riddle.
But it really captures the unique nature of Indian federalism.
Okay.
So on the one hand, you have the Constitution, and it's all about national unity.
Right.
But here's the twist.
Okay.
It gives the central government some serious power,
Like what?
like the ability to create states, redraw the boundaries of states, or even dissolve states altogether.
Wait, hold on. You can just dissolve a state.
Yeah, it's a pretty significant power.
That seems like a lot of power for the central government.
Yeah, and it definitely sets India apart from a system like we have in the United States, where states have a more guaranteed existence.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah, the founding fathers of India really wanted to make sure that national unity would not be undermined by regionalism.
So they were trying to walk this tightrope
Exactly, a delicate balance.
between a strong center and then also empowering states.
Exactly.
So interesting.
And there's no better example of this than the case of Jammu and Kashmir.
Ah, yes. Article 370. This is something that I find so fascinating. So Laxmikanth mentions that this article, which gave Jammu and Kashmir this special status, was revoked just a few years ago in 2019.
That's right.
I mean, this was a landmark moment.
Yeah, it was a huge deal.
Huge.
And it was a move aimed at integrating the region more tightly with the rest of India.
Right.
But it also sparked a lot of debate about, regional autonomy versus national unity.
Right. Where do you draw the line?
Exactly.
And who gets to draw the line?
Exactly. And it's a good reminder that constitutions are open to interpretation and change, especially in a vibrant democracy like India, where the political landscape is always shifting.
Yeah, it's a living document.
Absolutely. It's constantly evolving.
So it's not just enough to go back and look at the Constitution from 1947 or whatever it was. You kind of have to.
You have to look at the whole.
Yeah, you have to see how it's playing out.
Exactly how it's being interpreted and reinterpreted over time.
And one of the things that Laxmikanth talks about as being a defining feature of modern Indian politics is the rise of these regional parties.
Absolutely.
Which is so interesting because it's not something that I think a lot of people who maybe just get like a very, surface level understanding of Indian politics really think about.
Yeah, you really need a cheat sheet to keep track of all the players these days.
I know.
I mean, they've become a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah.
And especially with coalition governments.
Right.
It's not just these, 2 or 3 big national parties dominating the scene anymore.
Yeah, you can't just look at, what's happening in the capital.
You've got to understand all the regional dynamics.
Yes.
The personalities, the local issues that are at play.
Like every election is like this little snapshot of this very complex, very much evolving and changing nation.
And that's what makes it so fascinating.
Yes.
It's not just these dry facts and figures, right?
Right.
It's about understanding this living, breathing democracy.
I love that living, breathing democracy.
Yeah.
It's so true.
And speaking of fascinating, Laxmikanth mentions that 6 of India's prime ministers actually served as chief ministers before taking on the national stage.
Really? So they kind of like cut their teeth on governing a state.
Right. Maybe that's the perfect training ground for leading a whole country.
Wow, like a political boot camp for future prime ministers?
Exactly.
I love that.
It's like a stepping stone.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here. We've explored the legacy of colonial rule, the birth of the Indian Constitution, this idea of federalism, the role of the judiciary, the dynamism of Indian elections. My head is spinning.
Mine too.
Hopefully your head is spinning too if you're listening to this.
It's a lot to take in, but it's so important.
It is, and it's fascinating.
It is.
And the best part is this is really just the tip of the iceberg.
Oh, yeah.
We are just scratching the surface. There's so much more to discover
So much more.
about India and its journey as a democracy.
And about its future.
Laxmikanth has really given us the roadmap.
He's given us the tools.
But now it's up to all of us.
To keep exploring.
Keep exploring, to keep asking questions, to keep digging.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because there's always more to learn.
And I think, especially as we're going through this, there are these really big questions that I think are important for all of us to consider. Like,
Yeah.
how does India's very unique brand of federalism
Right.
shape its destiny?
It's a good question.
How does it grapple with this concept of secularism in such a diverse society?
It's an ongoing challenge.
And then also this balance between individual rights and national unity.
It's a tightrope walk.
It's a tightrope walk.
For sure.
These are big questions, and these aren't just academic questions.
No, they're very real.
These are questions that are the heart of what defines India today.
And its future.
So keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep being amazed, I think
so too.
by the complexities and the contradictions of this incredible democracy.
That's what it's all about.
That's what it's all about. This is what a deep dive is.
That's right.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been my pleasure.
We'll see you next time.
See you later.
It's like they said, okay, this is it. These are the lines you don't cross.
Exactly. And it shows how important the courts are in India.
Yeah.
They've had such a big role in interpreting the Constitution, making sure those big ideas are protected, even from the government itself.
Yeah.
You know, like we were talking about before, that balance between different parts of the government.
Yeah, the checks and balances.
Right.
So we've been really focused on the Constitution itself, but Laxmikanth also talks about the Lok Sabha elections, you know, the big ones where India elects its parliament.
Oh, yeah.
It's like the Super Bowl of Indian politics.
It's huge. And so many people vote. It's incredible.
I know. And Laxmikanth goes into how the governments formed the parties that have really mattered over time, the way things have shifted around. It's really interesting stuff.
Yeah, it's like a political thriller in real life.
Totally. And it's not just about the numbers. You know, you've got all these different ideas about how society should work, caste, religion, different regions, all mixed in and influencing how people vote.
That's what makes it so dynamic and, yeah, a little hard to predict sometimes.
It's true. You can't just focus on the national level. You have to understand what's happening in different parts of the country, too.
Exactly.
It's like each election gives you this snapshot
Yeah, a glimpse.
of this really complicated, always changing country.
And that's what makes this whole thing so fascinating, right?
Yes.
It's not just dates and names. It's about really understanding how Indian democracy works in real life.
I love that.
Yeah, me too.
And speaking of fascinating little details, Laxmikanth mentions that 6 of India's prime ministers were actually chief ministers before becoming prime minister.
That's right.
So they got their start running a state.
It makes you wonder if that's the best training you could have.
Yeah, maybe it is like a political boot camp for future prime ministers.
Exactly, like a testing ground.
That's fascinating.
It is.
All right, so we've covered a lot. We talked about the impact of British rule, the creation of the Indian Constitution, this idea of federalism, the role of the courts, the excitement of Indian elections. It's a lot.
It is, but it's so important to understand.
It really is. And the exciting thing is that we're just scratching the surface here.
There's always more to learn.
There's so much more out there to discover about India and how it became the democracy it is today.
It's an incredible story.
It really is. And Laxmikanth gives us a starting point.
A foundation.
But now it's up to all of us to keep digging deeper. Keep asking those tough questions.
I love that.
You know, as we're going through this, I keep thinking about these big questions that we touched on, like how will India's unique approach to federalism shape its future?
That's a big one.
It is, how does India handle this idea of secularism with so many different religions and beliefs?
That's something they're always working on.
And how do you find that balance between individual rights and what's best for the whole nation?
Such important questions.
These aren't just things you talk about in a classroom.
No way.
These questions are at the very heart of what defines India today and what it will become in the future.
They're the heart of the matter.
So keep those questions in mind, keep learning, and keep being amazed by the complexity and sometimes the contradictions of this incredible democracy.
That's what it's all about.
That's what it's all about, and that is a deep dive.
I love it.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It was great being here.
And we will see you next time for another deep dive.
See you then.